Hey, it's Hannah. So I've got a question for you. What if someone offered you a massive piece of land, completely for free? Sounds amazing, right? Well, today we're going to jump in our time machine and head back to learn all about something called the Homestead Act. We're going to see what it was, why people would literally pack up everything they owned to move west, and we've got to ask the big question. Was this deal actually fair for everyone? Let's dig in. Okay, so let's get right to it. Free land? Seriously? I mean, the US government was just giving it away? It sounds like a dream come true, especially back then. But you know what they say? If something sounds too good to be true, it usually is. Let's see if that's the case here. All right, our story kicks off way back in 1862. Now think about this. This is a super important moment in American history. The Civil War is raging. And right in the middle of all that chaos, the US government passes a law. A law that would completely change the face of the country and the lives of millions of people forever. A really big deal. And that law, it was called the Homestead Act. The government made this incredible offer, basically to get people to move out and settle the huge open Western territories. The deal was pretty straightforward on paper at least. If you were willing to pack up and move west, build yourself a home, and actually farm the land for 5 whole years, then that land was yours. Pretty wild, huh?
So you might be thinking, okay, sign me up. But how did it actually work? Well, there were 4 big steps you had to follow. First, you had to survive the long, tough journey out west. Second, you had to build a real house to live in. Third, you had to get farming, and I mean really farming. And last, the real kicker, you had to stick it out and live there for 5 years straight. You do all that, and then the land was yours.
Okay, but how much land are we really talking about? Get this, 160 acres. That's a huge number. For families who maybe had nothing, who were living in crowded cities or working on someone else's farm, the idea of owning that much space, it wasn't just an opportunity, it was absolutely life-changing.
To really wrap your head around how big 160 acres is, picture a football field. Now imagine 160 of them, all stitched together. That's what we're talking about. Can you even imagine walking from one end of that to the other? It's just a massive, enormous piece of land to call your very own. All right, so this brings us back to that big question from the beginning. Was this land really free? And the answer is, well, no, not really. There was a catch. It took a ton of hard work, and the whole process was called proving up. You had to pay a small fee, you had to build that house, you had to farm the land, and you even had to get witnesses to swear you'd actually lived there for 5 years. And believe me, the challenges started long before they even got to their new land. Just the journey west was this epic, difficult task. We're talking no cars, no highways. Families were crammed onto trains or packed into wagons, bumping along rough trails for weeks, sometimes even months, with no idea what was waiting for them. Just try to imagine what that was like. You couldn't just turn back if you forgot something. Everything, and I mean everything, you owned had to fit in one wagon. Your food, your tools, your clothes, your blankets, the seeds you needed to plant, your entire life, packed up to start completely from scratch. Let's just stop for a second and think about that. Would you want to ride in a wagon for weeks, day after day, just bumping along through scorching heat, crazy storms, and just so much dust? It's almost impossible to imagine how tough that must have been. And getting there wasn't the finish line. Nope, it was just the start of a whole new set of struggles. The Great Plains were no joke. We're talking blazing hot summers, bone-chillingly cold winters with tons of snow, constant wind, and even swarms of bugs like grasshoppers that could just wipe out your entire farm in a day. So you get there and you need to build a house, right? But wait, there are hardly any trees. What do? Well, you build a house out of the one thing you have a lot of: dirt. Seriously, they were called sod houses, and they were made from these big bricks of grassy earth. As you can imagine, they were often dark, a little muddy, and bugs and even snakes could totally get in. So with all of these incredible challenges, it's probably not a surprise that a lot of people just couldn't make it. The numbers are pretty stark, actually. Historians figure that about half, 50%, of all the homesteaders failed. They just couldn't prove up. After all that work, they had to give up and leave their dream behind. Okay, everything we've talked about so far has been from the perspective of the settlers. But now we need to talk about a very, very important truth. Because to really get the whole story of the Homestead Act, we have to talk about who was already there.
This land was not empty. Not at all. For centuries, it was home to many, many Native American tribes. And this wasn't just a random place they lived, it was everything to them. It was their culture, their food source, it was where their sacred places were.
But the US government completely ignored the rights of these tribes. They broke treaties, they went back on their promises, and they often used the army to force Native American people off their ancestral lands. They pushed them onto much smaller, often worthless pieces of land called reservations.
And this is where you see the two completely different sides of the Homestead Act. It's like two different stories happening at the same time. For the settlers, it was a dream, a chance for a new home and a new life. But for Native Americans, it meant losing their homes, having promises broken, and watching their way of life get destroyed.
You just can't look at this history any other way. It was a deep, profound injustice. One group of people got a chance to build a dream, but it was on the land taken from another group who lost everything. Plain and simple, that was not fair. So why does this act from so long ago still matter today? Because its impact was huge, and it's complicated. It's a story of both better and worse. On the one hand, yes, it helped towns and states grow and totally change the map of the USA. But on the other hand, it did all of that by deeply hurting Native Americans and being incredibly unfair to so many people.
Wow, we have covered a lot of ground today. So let's do a quick recap of the most important things we learned about the Homestead Act.
Okay, if you remember anything, remember these three things. 1. The Homestead Act gave people land, but they had to work incredibly hard for it for 5 years. 2. Life for a homesteader was unbelievably difficult. And 3, and this is the most important one, this whole deal wasn't fair to everyone because it came at a terrible cost to the Native Americans who were already living there.
So, I want to leave you with a question to think about. Now that you know the whole story, the amazing dream of owning your own land, the absolutely brutal hardships, and the terrible injustice of it all, if you lived back then, what would you have done? Would you have moved west? It's a tough one, with no easy answers. Thanks for time traveling with me today.